Welcome to Folk Fear, a place where forgotten rituals, ancient curses, and unsettling traditions still breathe through the mist of memory. This is not a channel for jump scares or cheap thrills. Here, the horror is older, deeper, and more patient. It rises from buried beliefs, passed down through generations, and waits in silence until someone dares to remember. Tonight's story is called The Mourning Feast, a haunting tale set in a mist-covered valley where the dead are never buried alone. After every funeral, the living must prepare one final meal, the favorite dish of the deceased, and leave it untouched on the table overnight. By morning, the food must be gone, every bite, because if even a single morsel remains, it means the spirit has rejected the offering and someone else must take their place. But what happens when the food disappears and the dead still linger? When every night smells like smoke and something unseen begins to chew beside you in the dark. Stay with us, listen closely, because once the dead begin to dine, they never leave the table. They say the valley was carved by sorrow itself, a place shrouded in mist, tucked between steep cliffs and crooked trees that never shed their leaves. It does not appear on any map, nor is it spoken of beyond the mountains. Not because it's forgotten, no, that would be a mercy, but because those who know it understand some places are better left untouched by memory. In this valley, there is no burial without a meal. For generations, the villagers have followed a single unbreakable rule. After death, the body is cleaned and dressed in ceremonial silk. The favorite dish of the deceased is cooked with devotion, each ingredient prepared exactly as they loved it in life. That meal is placed on the table beside the coffin and left overnight, under candlelight and silence. No one eats, no one prays aloud. They only wait. By dawn, if the food is gone, it means the spirit has accepted the offering and moved on. But if even a single bite remains, the meaning is clear. The dead have rejected it, and someone living must take their place. This is known as the Mourning Feast. It was the first thing May learned as a child, not from her mother, but from her grandmother, a woman whose silence was heavier than her voice, who smelled of sandalwood and bitter herbs, and who believed that grief should be cooked, not cried. The year May turned 22, she married Jian. He was handsome, older by 7 years, and chosen for her by the elders. At first, he brought her flowers, marigolds, bright and thick with pollen. He sang old valley songs in the evenings and said her name like a prayer. But it didn't take long for the bruises to start, first on the arms, then deeper. She never screamed. In the valley, women didn't scream. They served. They endured. By the time she was 28, May moved through her days like a ghost. Her eyes never met anyone's. Her words were measured like rice. Even the old women stopped whispering about her, because in this valley, even pain becomes tradition. Then one morning, Jian collapsed. He had complained of chest pains in the night, but refused help, as always. May stood still, watching him grip the table's edge, gasp for air, and fall to the ground. When he stopped moving, she did not cry. The villagers came, as they always did, a quiet procession of faces lined with years and soot. They wrapped Jian in ceremonial silk, laid him out in the central house, and lit the incense. The mourning feast would be held that night. As was custom, May was the one to cook. She stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hands steady, surrounded by baskets of dried mushrooms, chili oil, and ginger root, his favorite. The clay pot steamed, the scent of spice filled the room, but her thoughts were not on taste. They were on silence, on bruises, on every time she had bit her tongue to keep her teeth. And so, as she stirred the broth, she added something more. A powder hidden in the folds of her grandmother's old prayer book, white, fine, and deadly. Not enough to kill a living man, but enough to poison the dead. Enough, she thought, to make him choke, even in the afterlife. When the meal was done, she placed it gently on the offering table, bowed once, lit the final stick of incense. Then she turned and left, never looking back. That night she did not sleep. She waited, alone in the dark, listening to the wind push against the wooden walls, listening for movement, for coughing, for groaning, but there was nothing, only silence. At dawn, she returned to the offering table. The food was gone, every bite. And for the first time in years, May allowed herself a small smile. It was over, she thought. Finally, it was over. But deep in the valley, the mist did not lift that morning. Instead, it thickened, and from the ashes of the incense, something unseen began to breathe. In the days following the funeral, the valley grew quiet. Not the gentle quiet of peace, but the kind that presses against your skin, thick, watching, listening. The kind that feels like holding your breath in a room that shouldn't exist. May wore the white linen of mourning, her hair bound tight, her eyes cast low. She moved through the rituals with perfect precision, lighting the morning incense, burning joss paper in the courtyard, reciting the old hymns in her grandmother's voice, not her own. The villagers praised her discipline. "Such a devoted widow," they murmured, "so graceful in grief." No one asked her how she felt. No one ever did. What they didn't see, what no one dared to see, was the flicker of something buried deep behind her eyes. Not sadness, not relief, something quieter, something colder. Not a flame, but an ember that refused to die. She visited the river 3 days after John's death, walking barefoot across the wet stones, carrying his ashes in a jar wrapped with red string. There she scattered them with a steady hand, watching the black powder vanish into the current. Her lips didn't move. She spoke no blessing. He did not deserve one. The elders did not notice, or if they did, they said nothing. That evening, back in her home, she sat in the kitchen alone. The clay pot that once boiled with his meal sat cold and clean, the cutting board unused, the shelves stocked but untouched. May did not eat. She stared at the empty table, remembering all the nights she had sat across from him in silence, nursing swollen fingers, listening to him chew too loudly, drink too much, speak too cruelly. There had never been room for her voice in that house, only his. Now the house was hers, and the silence felt different. But it didn't last long. On the fourth night, she heard it. A sound so faint, she almost mistook it for wind. But wind didn't move like that. It didn't shuffle or scrape. It didn't creak the floorboards in familiar rhythms. It didn't sit in the dark corner across the room and breathe. She lit a candle. The flame flickered wildly for a moment, as if gasping for air, then steadied. She turned slowly, scanning the room. No one. Nothing. The house looked as it always had, worn and quiet, but the hairs on her neck stood up. She slept with the light on that night. The next morning, She stepped outside and found a sparrow dead on her doorstep, its neck twisted, its wings stiff, a perfect circle of ash around its body. She burned it without a word. Later that day, she visited the market. As she walked past the vendor stalls, she noticed something strange. The villagers were looking at her, but only from the corners of their eyes. Conversations halted as she passed. Children turned away. One woman crossed herself with 3 fingers and backed into her hut. No one spoke to her, not even to offer condolences. It was subtle, but May had lived her whole life in this valley. She knew what silence could mean, and this silence was different. At the herb stall, she reached for dried chrysanthemum. The old seller, Bao, hesitated before handing it to her. His hands trembled slightly. His eyes never met hers. She looked at him and asked softly, "Do you believe in ghosts, Uncle Bao?" He didn't answer. He only placed the herbs in her basket, bowed, and turned away. That evening, May sat by the hearth, sipping hot water. She tried to ignore the strange feeling that had settled in her chest, a weightless unease, like something just out of reach was trying to be heard. When she rose to wash the cup, she noticed the dining table again. It had 2 bowls on it. One was hers, the other she hadn't placed. Both were empty. The chopsticks rested side by side, aligned, neat, just like John had kept them. May froze. Her heart didn't race. It slowed, as if her body instinctively knew not to draw attention. Her mind clawed for logic. Had she forgotten? Had she done it out of habit? But she hadn't cooked anything that night. She picked up the second bowl. It was warm. She dropped it. The sound of ceramic shattering against the floor echoed like a scream in the small house. She backed away, breathing shallowly, the air suddenly thick with something unfamiliar, something burnt. The scent lingered long after the pieces were swept away. Later, as she lay in bed, covers drawn to her chin, eyes wide open in the darkness, she realized something she had been trying not to admit. The food on the offering table had vanished that night. Every bite, even the poisoned ones. What then had eaten it? And what did it mean if the dead had accepted the meal? The kitchen still smelled like him. Though days had passed since Jian's funeral, the scent lingered. Pepper oil, dried mushroom, and that faint trace of old tobacco soaked into the beams. May tried to ignore it. She had scrubbed the counters twice, aired the windows, burned camphor and wormwood until the air stung her eyes. But no matter what she did, the smell always returned by nightfall. It was strongest near the hearth, where she had prepared the feast. She found herself staring at the clay pot again. The same pot she had used for years. The same pot that had simmered John's favorite dish the night of his death. May had known what he loved: hot, spicy broth filled with wild mushrooms, tofu, and slices of ginger that floated like pale ghosts. She had learned to make it the way his mother used to, down to the exact pinch of salt and oil. Not out of love, not even out of duty, but because the valley had rules. To honor the dead, you must feed them well. To keep the dead from lingering, the meal must satisfy. So, on the night of the mourning feast, she followed every rule, every detail, every tradition. And then, she broke the most sacred one. The poison was hidden in a porcelain jar, no larger than a teacup. A gift passed quietly from her grandmother's hands to hers many years ago, without words, without explanation. May had always known it wasn't meant for healing. The powder was pale, almost beautiful, dissolving instantly in boiling water. She had only used a pinch, barely more than a breath, not to destroy the food, but to mark it, to curse it, to send a message to the afterlife. You are not welcome here. She had poured the soup carefully, smoothed the surface with the ladle, laid the chopsticks across the bowl exactly as required, angled slightly to the left, never crossed. She had lit the incense with a steady hand, bowed 3 times, and walked away. No part of her expected it to be eaten. She had imagined waking the next morning to find it untouched, maybe a bite taken, then left behind in disgust. That was the plan. That was what she needed. Because if the dead refused the offering, the spirit was banished, the chain was broken, the debt ended. But the bowl was empty, completely, cleanly, gone. Now, each time she entered the kitchen, her chest tightened, not with guilt, but with confusion, with something far more dangerous: uncertainty. What did it mean for a cursed meal to be consumed? The elders spoke often of the rituals, but never of exceptions, never of what came next when a line was crossed. The valley had always been built on rules, but May was starting to wonder if the dead followed different ones. That evening, she couldn't bring herself to cook. She sat in the corner of the room with her knees pulled to her chest, the hearth cold, the windows shut tight against the fog that now refused to lift. Outside, the mist pressed against the glass like breath. Inside, she listened. At first, there was nothing but occasional crack of wood settling. Then, soft, muffled, wet, a chewing sound. It didn't come from outside. It came from the hallway. She froze. The sound wasn't loud. It was deliberate, slow, as if someone, something was savoring each bite. She rose, barefoot, and crept toward the door. Her fingers brushed the handle, hesitated. Then, silence. She opened it. The hallway was empty, bathed in dim candlelight. But the air was wrong, thick with the smell of cooked mushroom and something else underneath, something burnt and faintly metallic. Her mouth went dry. On the small table near the door, a set of chopsticks lay perfectly aligned, but she hadn't left them there. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she searched the house, every room, every cupboard. She found nothing out of place except in the kitchen, where the salt jar had been opened and a thin line of powder trailed from the counter to the floor. She followed it, heart pounding, all the way to the dining table. 2 bowls. Again. One hers, one not. Neither had food in them. She reached out, touched the rim of the second bowl. Still warm. A chill ran down her spine. Someone or something had eaten again. It wasn't just a haunting. It was a ritual. A new one. Ongoing. Rewritten. And she had started it. The day began like any other. Mist blanketed the valley, clinging to the rooftops like old lace. The sun, if it rose at all, never pierced through the fog. May stepped outside in silence, the hem of her white mourning robe brushing damp earth as she made her way toward the well. But something had changed. The villagers did not greet her. Old women who once nodded politely now turned their backs. Men who used to sell fish and rice at the roadside market quietly packed their baskets as she approached. Children ran from her shadow, clutching their toys with wide, unblinking eyes. And though no one spoke a word, May could feel it, the weight of their fear pressing against her skin. She was no longer seen as the grieving widow. She was something else now, something marked. That afternoon, she found a bundle of herbs hanging from her doorframe, bound tightly with red twine and dusted in ash, a protection charm, one she had not placed there. Someone was trying to ward her off from her own home. She took it down, fingers trembling, and burned it in the hearth. But the smoke it gave off was bitter, sour, and clung to her hair like rot. As night fell, the dread returned. It always did, right when the sun slipped behind the cliffs and the air grew still, like something was holding its breath. May lit a candle, then another, until every corner of her house glowed with flickering gold. But no amount of light could banish the feeling inside her. Something was watching, not through the windows, from within the walls. She sat at the table, staring at the two bowls again. One hers, one not, both empty, both spotless, as if licked clean. She hadn't cooked, she hadn't eaten, but here they were, waiting for her. She stood, walked into the kitchen, and examined the shelves. Nothing missing, no signs of disturbance, but the clay pot still felt warm, and when she lifted the lid, the faint smell of mushroom and pepper oil drifted out. Her breath caught. Someone had cooked. She backed away slowly, her hands cold and damp. Her mind raced, grasping for logic. Sleepwalking? A cruel prank? No, no one in the village would dare enter a home touched by the dead. That night, she locked every door and window. She stuffed cloth under the cracks and slept with a blade under her pillow. It did not help. She woke to the sound of chewing. Again. Closer this time. It came from the foot of her bed. Not loud, not frantic, just slow, methodical chewing, like someone enjoying a meal without worry. May didn't move, didn't breathe. Her body froze as her ears strained to hear. The sound stopped. Then came the smell. Smoke, but not firewood, not incense, something deeper, older, like burnt flesh wrapped in wet cloth. The scent slid into her lungs and sat heavy on her chest. She forced herself to sit up, her eyes adjusting to the dark. There was no one there. But when she walked into the kitchen, she found the bowls again. Full this time. One with soup, the other with rice and shredded meat. Both steaming, and placed precisely across from one another. A place for her, a place for him. She staggered backward, nearly knocking over a chair. Her hand reached for the doorframe, anchoring herself as nausea surged in her gut. Her stomach growled involuntarily, and that somehow was the most terrifying part, because the food smelled good, familiar, comforting, like home. She didn't touch it, couldn't, but she sat at the table and stared for hours. And as the candle burned low, something occurred to her. The food hadn't just been eaten, it had been appreciated. Someone had liked the meal. She could feel it, a satisfaction in the air, like the echo of a sigh after hunger is fed. It didn't make sense. The offering had been poisoned, cursed, tainted, and yet he had eaten it, all of it. And now he had come back for more. The first time she truly heard it, truly knew it was not imagined, was just past midnight. It had rained earlier that evening, and the valley was drenched in a slow, steady drip of water falling from the trees. May had been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, too tired to sleep but too afraid to close her eyes. The candle on her bedside table burned low, casting nervous shadows that stretched across the walls like fingers. She thought she was alone. She thought she had survived another night. And then it began again. That slow, wet sound. Chewing. Not frantic, not starving, just steady, rhythmic, as if someone were seated nearby, enjoying a meal in silence. May bolted upright, heart thudding against her ribs. The sound was no longer coming from the kitchen. It was coming from inside her room. She turned toward the corner, toward the small, low table where her grandmother's old incense burner still sat. A faint line of smoke rose from the ashtray, but it wasn't from anything she had lit. The chewing continued. She could hear lips parting, the crackle of something soft being torn by teeth, and the occasional deep breath between bites. And worse, she could hear it swallowing. Her throat tightened. She whispered, "Who's there?" No answer, only chewing. She reached for the candle and held it up. The flame wavered, revealing the room piece by piece, the wooden floorboards, the bare window, the sealed door. No figure, no face. But the bowl on the table was full, and it was no longer steaming, just warm. She stepped toward it slowly, the candle trembling in her hand. Her breath shook as she leaned in to examine the contents. Tofu, mushroom, chopped chives, red oil floating in ribbons across the top. Jian's favorite soup again. She hadn't cooked it. She hadn't even bought those ingredients. But here it was, fresh and real, the smell nearly identical to what she had once made him every week. And beneath the surface, she could see something else. A shadow, a slick, dark sliver. She dipped a chopstick in and stirred. A human fingernail floated to the top. She dropped the candle. The flame went out. Darkness swallowed her, and the chewing stopped. For one endless moment there was nothing. No sound, no movement, only her pounding heartbeat filling the room. Then came the breath, a hot, humid exhale against her ear. Close, too close. It smelled like smoke and meat, like teeth. She screamed. But when she lit another candle, the room was empty, the bowl gone, the fingernail gone. Even the shadows seemed to retreat as if startled by her voice. She didn't sleep. At dawn, she wandered to the village shrine, barefoot, hollow-eyed, barely present. The priestess who tended the altar saw her approaching and stepped away without a word. May collapsed to her knees before the ancestral tablets. She didn't pray, didn't burn incense. She just stared until the wind shifted and the smell returned. Mushroom, smoke, firewood. She turned, and there, behind her, a line of red footprints trailed down the shrine steps, wet and smoldering, but no one had entered, no one had passed her. The priestess crossed herself and hissed under her breath, "The dead do not walk unless they are fed." May replied in a whisper, "He was fed." The priestess looked at her. "No," she said, "he was fed, and he enjoyed it." That night, the chewing returned, not just in her bedroom, but in every room. The walls creaked, the floorboards thumped softly like feet pacing in the dark, and once, only once, she saw movement in the reflection of a bowl of water. A man's shadow, seated at the table, head bowed, chopsticks in hand. When she turned around, the room was empty. The bowl was gone, and on the floor, in the dust, were bite marks, perfect human teeth pressed into the wood, as if he had tried the house next.
The village shrine had always been a place of answers. Its wooden pillars were stained dark from centuries of smoke, its roof patched with moss, and its floor forever lined with the thin ash of burnt offerings. It sat atop the hill that overlooked the valley, surrounded by old pine trees and the silence of generations. People came there for guidance, for forgiveness, for luck, but not for mercy. Mercy in the valley was something you earned before you died. May returned the next morning, her steps slow, her eyes bloodshot. She carried no offering, no prayer scroll, no food, only questions. The shrine's guardian, a wrinkled woman named Madame Rui, watched her approach with narrowed eyes. She had once delivered May into the world with her own hands. Now she stepped back, drawing a line of salt across the altar floor as May crossed the threshold. "You shouldn't be here," Madame Rui said quietly. "I didn't come to ask for blessings." "Then you came for punishment." May said nothing. The two women stood in silence, broken only by the soft crackle of the incense and the occasional groan of the old wooden beams. The air was thick with the scent of wormwood and smoke. Outside, the mist pressed against the paper walls like a waiting crowd. Finally, May spoke. "Something is eating with me." The old priestess didn't react. May continued, voice low and even. "Every night, a meal appears. I never cook it. I never see who brings it. But it's always the same. Jian's favorite. The food I poisoned. The one he should have rejected." The hands of the old priestess, which had been folded calmly, tightened around the prayer beads she wore. "And it disappears?" "Yes. Completely? Every bite." The old woman closed her eyes. Her lips moved, not in prayer, but in memory. "The spirit didn't reject it. He accepted it fully. Which means..." She hesitated. "Which means he came back full." May blinked. "I don't understand." The old priestess turned, pulled a scroll from under the altar and unrolled it across the table. It was old, so old that the ink had faded into blood-colored rust. On it was a painting, a family seated around a table, heads bowed. In the center sat a single figure with no face, just a mouth, open wide, devouring a bowl of rice with fingers instead of chopsticks. The mourning feast was never meant to nourish the dead. It was meant to satisfy the grief, to bind the sorrow and keep it from festering. The offering is a seal, May, and yours was broken. May shook her head. "He's dead. I saw him die. I watched them burn his body." "Yes, and now he eats in your home. He eats with you. He eats from you." May's breath caught in her throat. The priestess met her gaze with something close to pity. "If the dead eat what is poisoned, they do not die again. They change." "What do I do?" May asked, barely able to speak. "You don't feed him." "I don't," May whispered. "The meals appear on their own." "Then he's not coming for food anymore." The words hit like a stone in her chest. The priestess leaned in close, her voice now barely audible. "There is a saying, older even than this valley. If the dead return to your table, it is not for forgiveness. It is to remember the taste of what was lost and to reclaim it." "I want him gone," May said, her voice trembling. The priestess placed a small satchel of ash in May's hand. "Burn this at every doorway. Say nothing. Open no windows. Do not answer if he speaks." May nodded, but as she turned to leave, Madame Rui said one last thing. "If he's already sitting at your table, you may already be too late. That night, May followed every instruction. She burned the ash at the doors, drew salt lines across her floor, placed black candles at each window, and waited. The house was silent. For the first time in weeks, no food appeared, no chewing, no footsteps, no breath behind her ear. She almost cried from relief, until she noticed the bowl on her grandmother's altar. It was full, steaming, fresh, and placed directly on top of the family name scroll. The dead no longer waited for invitations. They were already inside. The morning after the altar offering appeared, May didn't open her door. She sat in silence, legs folded beneath her, staring at the steaming bowl placed on her grandmother's shrine. It had long gone cold, but the smell still clung to the walls. Ginger, vinegar, something charred, the kind of smell that seeps into fabric and skin. She hadn't cooked it, hadn't touched a single ingredient in days, and yet the food kept coming. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but she didn't eat, not from fear of poison, but something worse, contamination. Whatever crossed into her house each night wasn't just bringing meals, it was feeding off memory, feeding off her. By midday, the candles she had lit the night before had all gone out, every one of them. The racks melted in strange patterns across the floor, like grasping hands. The salt lines had been disturbed, swept aside in perfect curves, as if someone had stepped through them barefoot and careful. Something was undoing her defenses. She had to speak to someone who knew more than legends and incense. There was only one person left. Old Man Tien lived on the edge of the valley, just past the ancient burial trees, in a crooked house of dark wood and bone charms. He hadn't left his hut in years, not since his own wife died during a mourning feast that went wrong. Her spirit never answered, and in her place he claimed something else had come. Most thought he'd gone mad, but May no longer had the luxury of disbelief. She found him in his garden, muttering to himself, plucking dead flowers from dry soil. His eyes, cloudy and sharp all at once, flicked up as she approached. "You came too late," he said before she could speak. "I need to understand," she whispered, "about the feast, about what happens when the food is accepted." He stared at her, then slowly pointed to a small bench under the shade of a cracked roof. "You fed someone who should not have eaten," he said, "and now he remembers the taste." "I didn't mean to feed him. I poisoned the meal." Old Man Tien laughed, a dry, cracked sound. "Poison does nothing to the hungry dead. It's flavor to them, a challenge, a gift wrapped in anger. You didn't banish him, girl. You invited him with spice." Her mouth grew dry. "But I followed the rules." "Whose rules?" he snapped. "The ones told in temples, in storybooks? Those are for the living. The dead have their own." He leaned in, eyes suddenly sharp. "There are older rules, forgotten ones, the true laws of the mourning feast." May barely breathed. "Tell me." And so he did. The first rule: if the food is accepted, the spirit is satisfied, but satisfaction does not mean departure. The second rule: if the spirit eats in silence, it means they've come to remember, but if they begin to speak, it means they've come to stay. The third rule: if the same meal appears 3 times unbidden, it means the offering has reversed. You are no longer feeding them, they are feeding you. The fourth rule: if the food becomes warm when you are not near it, the spirit is near. If it becomes cold again while untouched, the spirit is inside you. And the final rule: If the spirit eats from your table 3 times and no name is spoken, your home becomes their altar, and you become the feast. May sat frozen, her blood like ice in her veins. I've seen 3 bowls, 3 nights. Tian nodded grimly. Then you have one thing left to do. What? He looked at her with pity. Starve him. She blinked. How? No meals, no table, no incense, no memory of him in your thoughts, not even his name. Cut him off like the breath of a candle. If he cannot eat, he will wither. And if I fail? Old man Tian's face grew dark. Then he will eat the one thing that never goes cold, he whispered. You. May stood, legs weak but mind sharp. She returned home and swept the floors, burned every scroll that bore Jian's name, threw out the clay pot she had once used for his meals, closed the altar, smashed the bowls. She would remember him no more. Not his face, not his voice, not even his cruelty. She would erase the taste of him from the house. But that night, as she lay in bed, the smell returned, not of soup, but of skin, charred, fresh, familiar. And down the hall, something was chewing.
The silence in May's house was no longer peaceful. It was crowded. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the walls felt like it belonged to something else, something watching, something waiting. She had scrubbed every surface, erased every trace of John's name, destroyed the bowls, sealed the altar, burned the scrolls. But still it returned. Not the food, not the footsteps, something worse. The first sign came at dawn. She had spent the entire night awake, guarding the thresholds, her body wrapped in smoke and salt, eyes red from lack of sleep. When the sun rose, if it could be called that in this forever misty valley, she finally allowed herself to breathe. There had been no sounds, no chewing, no smells. She walked to the table just to be sure, and found a plate sitting there. Not a bowl, a plate. A chipped old ceramic dish she hadn't used since the year Jian broke it during one of his drunken fits. Somehow it was whole again, restored to its original form, and on it sat a single piece of burnt tofu, cut perfectly into a square, untouched, cold, returned. She backed away slowly, her hands beginning to tremble. She hadn't placed it there. No one had. But it wasn't a gift. It was a message. She took the plate outside, buried it in the dirt, and poured a ring of ash around it. But the next day, it was back, this time on her windowsill. 2 pieces of tofu, still burnt, still untouched. The offering had not been accepted. The spirit was returning it, rejecting it, reversing it. By the 3rd day, the food was no longer tofu. It was rice, hardened and dry, with a single bite missing. The kind of bite that left teeth marks in the wood of the spoon. The kind of bite that wasn't human anymore. The plate sat at the foot of her bed. May didn't scream. She didn't cry. Instead, she whispered, "He's not eating it anymore." She remembered old man Tian's words. If the same meal appears 3 times, it means the offering has reversed. She was no longer the one offering food. She was being offered. She tried to leave the valley, packed a bag, wrapped herself in a traveler's cloak, and set off toward the path that led up the cliffs, through the fog, toward the world beyond. But the road was gone. Where the trail once curved between the trees, there was now only stone, smooth, seamless, as if the earth itself had swallowed the way out.
She turned around. The valley looked smaller than before. The mist hung heavier, and the houses in the distance seemed farther away, as though pulled from her. When she returned home, the door was open. She had locked it. She had tied it shut with rope and iron nails. Inside, the table was full. Dishes she hadn't seen in years. Meals she once made in desperation. Bowls of bitter melon, fried fish, soup with too much salt. Meals Jian used to complain about. Now they were here, presented like offerings, but not to him, to her. Every seat was set, every chair pulled back, and in the center, a pair of chopsticks rested on a folded napkin, the kind embroidered by her grandmother long ago. She stepped forward, drawn not by curiosity, but something deeper, something in her blood, a memory, a habit. Then she saw the mirror. It wasn't there before. A large, round mirror leaned against the far wall, its frame made of black wood, and in its reflection, May saw something that didn't match the room. In the mirror, someone was sitting at the table. A man, Jian, but not quite. His body was there, yes, the broad shoulders, the familiar posture, but his face was made of smoke, curling and shifting, with empty holes where eyes should be. And in his hand, her spoon, her food, her life. He took a bite, smiled, and vanished. The reflection returned to normal, but the taste lingered in her mouth, bitter, metallic, like she had already swallowed something. She fell to her knees, her stomach twisting, because it wasn't just a haunting anymore. It was a reversal, and she was now part of the ritual, an offering being returned, again and again, until she understood her place at the table.
The first time she saw him, he wasn't a ghost. He was a presence. He didn't float. He didn't glow. He didn't whisper in forgotten tongues or trail cold air behind him. He sat. That was the worst part. He sat at her table like he had never left, like the days between death and now had folded in on themselves, like time in the valley had grown tired of pretending to move forward. It began with the smoke. May was boiling water in the hearth. No food, just heat, just movement to fill the silence. When the air changed, it started subtly, a shift in temperature, the way candlelight bent ever so slightly, as if something heavy had entered the room. Then came the scent, not the comforting smell of wood smoke, or even the harsh burn of incense. This was different. This was burnt cloth, scorched hair, skin left too long on fire. She stood slowly, turning toward the source, the table. There he was, John, but not as he had been in life. His body was solid, but not right. The skin too smooth in some places, blistered in others. One eye was clouded, the other hollow. His shirt was the same one he'd worn on the day of his funeral, except now it was covered in ash and something darker, something that pulsed. His mouth didn't move, but smoke poured from it, curling, rising, snaking toward the rafters. May couldn't move. She couldn't scream. She could only watch as he lifted a pair of chopsticks, her chopsticks, and reached into a bowl that hadn't been there a moment ago. He brought the food to his lips, still steaming, and took a bite. Chewed, swallowed. The smoke thickened. Then he looked at her. Not with eyes, but with knowing. That deep, soul-piercing recognition that went beyond the body. A gaze that didn't ask, "Why are you here?" but instead said, "You've always been here." His mouth opened wider, unnaturally wide, as if unhinged, and he spoke, not in words, but in breath, in smoke, in memory. She heard it in her bones, not her ears. The echo of arguments, the slam of bowls, the sting of broken skin. The nights she slept with her hands curled into fists beneath the blanket. All of it came flooding back, pouring from him in invisible screams. She turned and fled, stumbling into the hallway, knocking over a stool, breath ragged. But the scent followed. It clung to her hair, her skin, the corners of her mouth. She could taste him, the salt, the spice, the slow-rotted bitterness that only he carried. She collapsed on the floor, alone, trembling, but not untouched. When she woke, it was morning. Sunlight filtered through the mist in pale, strained ribbons. The table was empty again, the chair pushed in, the bowls gone. Only a faint wisp of smoke remained, curling toward the cracked ceiling, carrying the smell of something long dead and deeply satisfied. On the floor beside her lay a single object, a tooth, old, human, still warm. She picked it up with shaking fingers and held it in her palm. Then she looked at her reflection in the teapot's side, distorted, warped, and for a brief second, she was the one exhaling smoke. Sleep came like a trap, not soft, not slow. It seized her, dragged her under with the weight of exhaustion and smoke, and locked her inside a world that did not obey rules, not the rules of the valley, not the rules of the living, not even the rules of the dead. May found herself standing in her childhood kitchen, but it was not as she remembered. The walls were darker, bloated with damp. The air was heavy with the smell of old soup and burnt rice. Her grandmother sat at the stove, back turned, stirring something in a pot that hissed and bubbled louder than it should. The flame beneath it roared, not a gentle cooking fire, but a blaze, unnatural, hungry. And the longer May looked, the more she realized there were no logs, no fuel. The fire was coming from inside the pot. Her grandmother turned, except it wasn't her grandmother. It was Jiang, wearing her grandmother's clothes, her hair, her skin, grinning through the cracks in her face as if the disguise were barely holding. "Come help," he said in her grandmother's voice. "It's almost ready." May backed away, heart pounding, but her feet stuck to the floor, thick and sticky with something black. The table was set behind her, the same bowls, the same rice, the same soup, but the chairs were filled, not with people, with memories. A young version of herself sat beside a younger Jiang, their eyes hollow, their faces frozen in an expression she couldn't name, something between grief and obedience. And across the table, something else sat watching. A man with no eyes, no nose, just a mouth stretching wider and wider, chewing even though nothing was in his mouth, chewing her name. May. The walls caught fire, quietly at first, as if the flames were shy. The shelves collapsed, the pot boiled over, the scent of smoke turned thick and sweet, like incense mixed with rotting fruit. Jiang stepped toward her,
His face shifted again, older, burned. Bits of his cheek sloughed off and landed on the floor with a hiss. "You cooked for me," he whispered. "So I came back, hungry." She tried to scream. No sound. She tried to run. Her body stayed. Then she woke up, gasping, soaked in sweat, the taste of ash on her tongue. She sat upright, blinking into the dark, searching for proof it had only been a dream. The hearth was cold. The floor was intact. But the smell, it was there. Faint, but real. Smoke and something cooked. She rose slowly, her limbs heavy, and stepped into the kitchen. The table was empty. No bowls, no plates. But carved into the surface, burned into the wood, was a single word: May. She stared at it for a long time, then looked up. And on the wall above the stove, drawn in soot, was the outline of a handprint, large, fresh, as if someone had leaned there to watch her sleep. She turned to run, but her foot slipped on something. She fell hard to the ground. When she looked down, her hand was resting in a small pile of bones, clean, white, still warm, and one of them was a finger. Her breath caught in her throat, because wrapped around that finger was a piece of red string, the kind used to bind the dead, the kind she had tied herself the night Jiang was buried.
It began with the smell. Not the sharp, smoky scent of firewood or incense, but even the foul tang of cooked flesh that sometimes haunted her dreams. This was different. It was faint, like the dust of burnt paper and old bones, a dry scent that made the back of her throat itch. May woke with it in her nostrils, the remnants of a scream caught in her chest. She sat up slowly, the room still dark, though morning had long since broken outside. Then she felt it, under her palms, beneath the blanket, on the sheets she had just washed the day before. Ash. Thin, gritty, clinging to her skin. She threw the blanket aside. The bed was covered in it. A gray film coated the mattress in the shape of a body, not hers. Longer, broader, like someone had lain beside her in the night, unmoving, slowly turning to dust. She staggered out of bed, chest heaving, and ran to the basin to scrub her hands. But even as the water turned gray and swirled down the drain, the scent stayed. Smoke. Not from outside. From inside the house. Inside her. Later, she tried to speak with the villagers. She stood outside the weaver's hut, hands trembling, lips dry, eyes pleading for someone to look at her, to speak, to say anything that might anchor her to the world of the living. But they didn't. They closed their doors, turned their backs. And when a child looked up at her from behind his mother's skirt, he burst into tears. "Is it true?" a voice whispered. May turned. An old woman, Lynn, who used to bring her fruit in the early days of her marriage, stood nearby, wringing her hands. Her face was drawn, and her eyes wouldn't meet May's. "Did you poison the feast?" The words hit like ice. May said nothing. "You did," Lynn whispered, stepping back. "That's why he's eating you now." She turned and walked away. That night, May locked every door again, though she knew it no longer mattered. She lay down, fully clothed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. She did not sleep. She did not blink. But somehow the night passed, and when she rose the next morning, the ash was back. This time, it wasn't just in the bed. It was in her hair, her mouth, her eyes.
She stumbled into the hall, coughing, rubbing her face raw. Her reflection in the mirror looked thinner, paler. Her lips were cracked, her fingernails rimmed with black, and on her shoulder, burn marks. Not from fire, from fingers, as if someone had touched her in the night, held her, possessed her. She ran to the front door and flung it open, and there on the threshold lay a trail of footprints, ashen, barefoot, leading into her home. She followed them back inside. They stopped at the dining table, where a fresh meal waited. Soup, rice, tofu. 3 bowls this time, and 3 sets of chopsticks. She reached out without meaning to, as if compelled, her fingers trembling above the steam. And then she saw it. A strand of her own hair in the soup. Black, long, still warm. Her own offering. To herself. To him. To whatever sat between them now. In the distance, a low, guttural sound echoed through the mist. Not a growl, not a breath. Chewing. Again, but louder. Closer. Coming from every wall at once. She no longer chose to cook. Her hands moved without her. Each night, sometime after the final candle flickered out and the wall stopped creaking, she would find herself in the kitchen, sometimes with the knife already in her hand, sometimes with the fire already lit beneath the clay pot. The ingredients were always there, laid out with impossible precision. Wild mushrooms, garlic chives, coagulated pig's blood, slices of tofu cut so thin she could see the blade's reflection in them. It was as if someone else had done the work for her, and now she was only finishing what had already begun. At first she resisted. She broke the bowls, burned the rice, spilled the soup onto the floor, but it never mattered. The next night, everything returned. The bowls unbroken, the food untouched. Her body, once again, standing barefoot in front of the hearth, eyes unfocused, hands obeying something deeper than thought. The feast would continue, whether she willed it or not. One night, she bit her own finger and let the blood drip into the broth, just to see if he would notice. The next morning, the bowl was empty, but the rim had changed. 2 perfect rows of teeth marks now pressed into the ceramic, deep, cracked, as if he'd tried to swallow the bowl whole. She began leaving out offerings of other things: hair, fingernails, ashes from her clothes. They all disappeared. Once, in a moment of rage, she mixed dirt into the rice and spat into the center of the soup. The next day, she found something returned to her on the plate. A piece of tongue. Not hers, not cooked, still bleeding. She didn't scream anymore. Screaming belonged to the early stages of haunting, when hope still fluttered, when logic still held weight. But May had passed beyond that. She was now part of a rhythm, a ritual older than mourning, deeper than grief. She was no longer grieving a man. She was feeding a hunger, and the hunger was growing. The meals were no longer small. She was preparing entire feasts: pork belly, braised duck, intestines stewed with ginger and wine. Dishes that hadn't been cooked in the valley for decades. Dishes she had no memory of learning. Yet her hands moved with certainty, chopping, seasoning, boiling. The table was full each night. The chairs pulled out, the seats warmed, the candles burned low and bent inward, as if something sat in every place, hunched and waiting.
And always, always, every plate was empty by morning. One night, as she cleared the table, she noticed something strange. A note, written in handwriting that wasn't hers. Thin, slanted, familiar. Tomorrow, make the eyes. She dropped it. It caught fire before hitting the floor. And when she opened the cupboard the next day, there was a jar of pickled sheep's eyes sitting neatly in the center, fresh, untouched, waiting. She didn't remember placing them there, but she didn't question it anymore. The feast must continue, because now it wasn't just Jean who came. The chairs kept multiplying, from 3 to 5, then 7, then 9. Each one pulled out just a little farther, each one carrying the scent of someone old, someone dead, someone hungry. She wasn't just feeding one spirit anymore. She had become the cook of the forgotten. The house moaned beneath their weight. The walls grew damp with breath. And in her sleep, May began to dream of voices she didn't recognize. Names she had never heard, begging her not to stop, whispering, "We remember you. We are grateful. We are still so hungry." There was something beneath the floor. She had always known, in the way a person knows when they are being watched, or when a mirror does not reflect quite what it should. The old boards in her kitchen creaked more than the others. They sagged slightly at the center, as if remembering weight that no longer sat above them. For weeks she avoided them, but now the whispering had changed. The voices in her dreams no longer begged for food. They called for truth. They repeated one word, again and again, in voices that overlapped in chorus, neither male nor female, just old. Down. May stood in the kitchen long after midnight, the fire cold, the bowls untouched for once. The mist outside pressed tight against the windows, but inside the air was dry, brittle, almost humming. The floor called to her now, not with sound, but pressure. So she fetched a knife, not to defend herself, to pry. She wedged it between the warped boards and pushed until the wood groaned, cracked, then gave way. Beneath it, darkness and a smell. Old, dusty. Not rot, but earth packed too long without air. She lifted the boards one by one, revealing a square space just large enough for a body to descend. A forgotten crawl space. A root cellar? No. She fetched a candle and stepped down. The stairs were shallow, made of stone, slick with something she didn't name. The deeper she went, the quieter the world became, as if sound itself had no interest in following her. And then suddenly, she was there. A room carved from the earth. Not built, hollowed. The walls were covered in etchings, ancient characters she barely recognized. Valley dialects mixed with something older, something forbidden. She traced her fingers along one of them and felt a jolt behind her eyes. Not pain, recognition. This place had always been beneath her. At the center of the room sat a table. Not wood, stone. On it lay objects wrapped in cloth, rusted utensils, withered herbs, dried petals, animal teeth, a cracked bowl made of what looked like bone, and a book. Its cover was made of stitched leather, blackened with age. When she touched it, it felt warm, breathing. The pages inside were written in the same ancient script, but she understood them, not by reading, by remembering. The first feast must never be broken. The mouth of the dead remembers kindness. The stomach of the dead remembers cruelty. The cook is a bridge. The bridge must never close. May turned the page. To end the hunger, you must find the first name, the name of the mouth that never closed. Her breath hitched. She turned to the final page. There was no writing, only a symbol, one she had seen carved into the bottom of the bowls she had been using for weeks. A spiral of teeth encircling a single dot. She stepped back. The earth below her shifted. The stone table cracked slightly, and something hissed behind the wall. She ran up the steps, sealing the boards behind her, heart pounding like it belonged to someone else. She tried to forget what she saw, to return to the rhythms that kept her sane. But the bowls that night had changed. No longer ceramic, stone, cold, familiar, etched with the symbol from the book. The first mouth was watching again, and now it wanted her name.
The old always say that the valley remembers, but no one ever says what it remembers or why. They speak in riddles. They wrap truth in fables. They call warnings wisdom and hope the young won't look too closely. Me had never questioned the Mourning Feast. It was just another tradition, another way to show respect, another thing women were taught to carry. But now, after everything, after the bones, the smoke, the teeth, she needed more than stories. She needed origin. The next morning, she returned to Old Man Tien's hut. He didn't open the door when she knocked. He didn't respond when she called. But she found him in the back, kneeling before a tree older than the village itself, its roots twisted around forgotten graves. His voice rasped before she could speak. "You went under your house." She nodded. "You read the book." Another nod. He sighed, slow and shaking. "Then you've heard her name, or rather, the name that was buried." "I saw the symbol, the spiral, the dot." Tien didn't look at her. He traced the air with his finger. A mouth that never closes, a hunger that never ends. She waited. And then, finally, he spoke the story no one else would. Before this valley was a village, before the graves were marked, there was a woman, a widow, the first. Her husband died in the deep cold, starved during the famine, but she had always hated him. He beat her, silenced her. So when he died, she did not mourn, she celebrated. Mi's heart pounded. She refused to offer a final meal, said her spirit could rot with his flesh. The elders warned her, saying the ritual was not for him, but for balance. Still she defied them. She mocked the practice, called it superstition. Tien turned to her now, and that night he returned. Not as himself, not even as a ghost, but as a mouth. A mouth that remembered every bite she never gave. A mouth that grew with every moment he was denied. He appeared in her home, sat at her table,
ate nothing, spoke nothing, just watched. Each night, a new chair appeared. Each night, another mouth joined. Spirits unfed, spirits unloved, spirits forgotten. What happened to her? Mi whispered. Tien looked into the dirt. She became the first cook. She fed them. She had no choice. And when she tried to stop, he raised his hand, and for the first time, May saw the burn scars on his palms, old, twisting, jagged. She didn't stop. She was turned to ash, slowly, a piece at a time, until only her hunger remained. Me felt the cold seep into her bones. She is the reason the ritual exists, not to honor the dead, but to keep them contained. And the book beneath my house, why was it hidden? Tien smiled sadly. Because the valley forgets on purpose, because knowing too much wakes things that prefer to sleep. Me left in silence. That night, the table was different again. There were now 12 bowls, 12 sets of chopsticks, and at the head of the table, her own grandmother's chair, empty, waiting. She sat across from it. Her hands trembled as she lifted the ladle. The soup had changed. No mushrooms, no tofu, no blood. Just something dark, thick, viscous, memory in liquid form. She dipped the spoon and placed it in the first bowl, then the second, then the third. As she reached the 12th, she heard it again. A voice not hers, not Jian's, not even human, but hers, the first widow, whispering from inside the bowl. You feed them now, so they feed on you. May looked at her hands. Her fingertips were gone, just bone, polished white, still moving.
By now, May had stopped marking the days. The sun no longer mattered, neither did the hour. Morning and night had blended into one long gray stretch of smoke and silence. She no longer opened the curtains. She no longer listened for birds. The world outside had shrunk to the size of her home, and even that was fading. But the smell was always new. It began on the underside of her blanket, faint and strange, a warmth that did not come from her own skin, but from something that had rested beside her and left behind a scent. At first, it was just the memory of heat, the kind that lingers on sheets after a body rises. Then came the meat. She noticed it the moment she stepped into the kitchen, a scent thick and sweet, curling around her nostrils, too familiar to ignore. Not incense, not stew, flesh, cooked, fresh. Her stomach turned, but her legs moved forward, unwilling or unable to resist. There on the table sat the usual bowls, nothing strange, nothing new, but the aroma rising from them was unmistakable. Burned fat, caramelized skin, crackling. She picked up one of the spoons. It was heavy, heavier than wood, darker than steel, warm to the touch. She dipped it into the broth and felt something give way. Not tofu, not mushroom, tissue. She dropped the spoon, heart pounding, breath caught in her throat. The spoon clattered, but didn't break. She backed away slowly until her foot struck something soft. She looked down. A piece of meat, small, oval, wet, rested on the floor behind her. At first, she thought it was part of an animal, until she saw the nail. Human. Her own. She screamed, but her voice was hoarse, broken from nights of silence and smoke. She ran to the basin, heart pounding, and plunged her hands into water, scrubbing, clawing, scraping. And then she saw it. One finger, the ring finger of her left hand. A bite taken clean from the pad, skin torn, nerve exposed, blood pooling beneath the nail. But she felt no pain, only warmth, numb warmth. Her body had been feasted on, not all at once, not in ceremony, but slowly, gently, like a lover tracing her in sleep, bitten in the dark, piece by piece. She grabbed a cloth and wrapped her hand, teeth chattering not from pain, but from the horror of what it meant. He was no longer just haunting her. He was feeding from her, and she hadn't noticed. She staggered toward the altar, desperate for answers, desperate for protection, but the shrine was gone. The scrolls burned, the candles melted into a single black puddle, and where her grandmother's prayer bowl once sat, there was now a lump of flesh, still pulsing, still warm. She fell to her knees. She whispered, "What do you want from me?" But deep down, she already knew. This was not punishment. This was intimacy. The dead no longer wanted her grief, or her fear, or her obedience. They wanted her body, her bones, her breath, her name. And they would take it the way they always took everything in the valley, through a meal. That night, she sealed every window with nails and salt. She smeared ash across the door. She did not cook. She did not set the table. She hid beneath the floorboards, wrapped in old cloth, heart racing. She listened. First came the footsteps, slow, heavy, familiar. Then the dragging, a chair pulled back, then another, 12 times. Then the chewing. It didn't echo. It throbbed, wet, smacking, delighted. Then silence, until the final sound, her voice, from above, laughing and chewing.
By the time the villagers stopped speaking her name, May was already gone. Not dead, but erased. She walked the narrow stone paths of the valley in silence. No one met her eyes. The women who once shared gossip now pulled their children close and crossed to the other side. The men at the market left their stalls as she passed, pretending to be busy with ropes that didn't need tying or tools that didn't exist. They didn't hate her, they feared her. And that, somehow, was worse. At first, they whispered. Then they watched. Then they stopped acknowledging her at all. Even Old Man Teen, who had once spoken the truth, no longer answered his door. His windows stayed shuttered. His shrine, once burning with protective herbs, had gone dark. She knocked, waited, knocked again. Nothing. On her way back through the market, she saw her reflection in a rusted tin mirror hanging outside the herbalist's hut. She didn't recognize herself. Her cheeks were hollow, her lips cracked. the edges of her eyes stained with soot and sleeplessness. Her hands, wrapped in cloth, trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the weight of what was no longer inside them. People spoke of ghosts as if they floated, but May walked, heavy-footed, shadowless, still breathing, but barely. That night, the sky above the valley changed. The mist, always soft and gentle, turned black at the edges. It pressed harder against the windows, creeping between the wooden boards. The air inside her home grew sour, thick with something rotting but not decomposing, like a thought left unspoken too long. She lit incense. The smoke curled sideways. She tried to eat. The food tasted like memory, bitter, salty, cold. And when she sat down to sleep, she found her blanket gone. In its place, folded neatly at the foot of the bed, was her grandmother's funeral robe. Not the one they buried her in, the one she used to wear when tending the dead. The message was clear: you are no longer among the living. The next morning, the villagers placed something at her gate. Not flowers, not stones. Teeth. 12 small teeth wrapped in red cloth. Human, old, worn smooth at the roots. They were offerings to her. The villagers had decided she no longer needed help. She needed appeasement. No one came near after that. Her doorstep grew thick with silent gifts: boiled eggs, dried meat, folded paper charms, all left in perfect rows, none meant for her to eat, just to keep her quiet, to keep her there, to keep her from leaving. Because now May was not the haunted, she was the haunting. She had become part of the valley's balance. The ritual needed her. The hunger had claimed her, and the people understood what the living always learn too late. Once a spirit starts eating, you do not chase it away. You feed it, you honor it, and you never speak its name. So the villagers stopped speaking hers, and she stopped speaking at all. There is a rule in the valley, older than mourning, older than names. If you cannot satisfy the dead, offer the living. No one speaks it aloud, but it lives in the silence, in the way the villagers look away, in the way offerings appear on the doorsteps of the cursed. By now, May had stopped pretending she didn't understand. She no longer feared the chewing sounds in the dark. She no longer jumped at the scent of burning skin. She accepted the empty bowls in the morning, the way one accepts a wound that refuses to scab. But she had not surrendered completely, not yet. Somewhere inside her, buried beneath the layers of ritual, smoke, and ash, was a splinter of defiance, a voice whispering, "What if it doesn't have to be you?" And so on the 7th night of the new moon, she made a choice. She would offer someone else. He wasn't important, just a boy, a new arrival to the village, young, curious, too new to know what silence meant. He had spoken to her once in the market, weeks ago. Just a smile, just a greeting. That was all it took. That night she cooked a meal not for the dead, but for the living. She used fresh ingredients, herbs from her garden, rice she had hidden from the spirits. She cooked with care, with purpose, with memory. And when the food was done, she wrapped it carefully, placed it in a basket, and delivered it to his doorstep. No words, just a knock, just the smell. He answered, confused but kind, thanking her with the soft voice of someone who still believed in good things. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. And then she went home,
and waited. The chewing returned that night, but it was louder, hungrier, faster. No bowls appeared on her table, no scent of soup or rice, only silence in her home and something satisfied far away. She slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The next morning, the village was buzzing. The boy was gone, his door left open, his bed cold, his name already whispered in past tense. May did not ask questions. She swept her steps, lit her incense, ate a piece of dried plum for the first time in days. That evening she set no table. She cooked nothing, and still nothing came. No smoke, no chewing, no whisper. She felt free, but freedom in the valley is always a trap. On the third night, she awoke to the sound of laughter. It was low, rattling, like breath caught in bone. Not Gion's, not her own, something else. She rose from bed slowly, cautiously, her bare feet touching the cold floor. The air felt heavier than before, thick like wet wool, and the scent different now. It wasn't burnt meat. It was iron, like blood in the mouth. She stepped into the kitchen and froze. 12 chairs, 12 bowls, and at the head of the table, him, the boy, but not whole. His head tilted at an unnatural angle, his mouth open wide in a frozen scream, his hands twitching, his skin gray. He sat among the others, one of them now. His eyes rolled back as he chewed slowly on nothing, and from his mouth came a whisper, "You fed me." May staggered backward, but she understood now. The hunger wasn't gone. It had learned. She had opened a door not to escape, but to share. And now, the dead had found a new rule. They didn't just want to eat. They wanted her to choose the next course.
There is a moment when resistance becomes ritual. Not surrender, not defeat, just quiet knowing. May no longer screamed, no longer cried. Her body moved as if it had always known this path, hands slicing, chopping, stirring without hesitation. But this time, it wasn't out of fear, it wasn't out of habit, it was intention. She was going to feed them one last time, but she would choose the dish, and she would choose what it meant. The kitchen felt different that night, colder, sharper. The mist outside had begun to press harder against the windows, like breath fogging glass, but it could not come in, not yet. She boiled the water slowly, watching it roll and hiss. She opened the cupboards and gathered what remained: wild onions, fermented tofu, dried herbs she could no longer name. She cut them clean, even as blood from her fingertips stained the cutting board. She didn't flinch, she didn't stop. And then she took more. From herself, a lock of her hair, a strip of skin from her forearm, a single tooth pulled with trembling fingers and silent tears. She added them to the pot, one by one, not in pain, but with reverence, a dish made not from fear, but from choice. This would not be Gion's meal. This would be hers, her scent, her taste, her name. The broth turned dark, almost black, but clear, reflective. When she peered into it, she did not see herself. She saw them, all of them. 12 mouths, 12 chairs,
12 shadows waiting to be fed, and in the center, him, the mouth that never closed, the first hunger. But none of them reached forward, none of them took. They waited, watching, breathing in unison with her. She poured the soup into 12 stone bowls, their edges etched with the spiral tooth symbol, and she placed them gently at the table, one by one. Then, in silence, she dressed herself in her grandmother's robe, the one left at the foot of her bed, the one worn by the women who prepared the dead. She braided her hair, cleaned her face, laid out her body like a final offering. Then she sat at the 13th place, head bowed, hands still, waiting. No incense, no prayer, just the scent of her final dish rising in the air like memory. And then the chewing began. First from the far end of the table, then closer, then beside her. But none of them touched her bowl. They ate from the others, all of them, every bite, until the bowls were clean, until the sound faded, until only breath remained. May raised her eyes. They were watching her now, not with hunger, but with acknowledgement, not as prey, not as servant, as cook, as keeper, as gate. The first hunger nodded once and vanished. One by one the others followed, leaving nothing behind. No bowls, no stains, no breath. Only silence, and a room that had never been fuller.
The silence lingered. It wasn't peace, it wasn't rest. It was the kind of silence that knows how to wait. May remained at the table long after the bowls had vanished. The air around her felt hollowed out, like something had been scooped from the world and nothing dared to fill it. Even her breath felt smaller, shallower, like lungs were no longer needed in this kind of quiet. But she was still there, still breathing, still whole, still not free. She rose slowly, the robe brushing against her ankles like river reeds. Her hands, though wrapped in cloth and dried blood, no longer trembled. Her body moved gently, like it was no longer entirely hers, as if something else was guiding her from within. The room was clean, impossibly clean. No bones, no bowls, no candles, only the table and her. She stepped outside for the first time in days. The mist had thinned, but the village looked smaller now. The trees bent away from her path. The crows on the rooftops fell silent as she passed, and every door remained closed. She didn't knock, she didn't speak. She only walked to the edge of the rice fields where the boy had once greeted her, where the world still tried to pretend it was untouched. She waited there until dusk, and when the sun lowered behind the cliffs, she saw it again. The smoke, rising not from chimneys, but from mouths, invisible to the others, but not to her. It leaked from the lips of the villagers, from the corners of their homes, from the spaces between prayers. The hunger had not left. It had spread. It was no longer eating at the edge. It was seated at every table. That night, May did not light incense. She did not cook. But when she awoke the next morning, she found something on her doorstep. A bowl, still warm, and beside it, a note.
written in the same slanted, unfamiliar hand she'd seen before. "Thank you. We are full now." But the bowl never cooled. It sat there, steaming gently, day after day. She tried to throw it away. It returned. She tried to bury it. It returned. No matter what she did, it stayed, full, heavy, a reminder. Because the truth was simple. A full belly never leaves. It lingers. It waits. It remembers the taste. And now, so did she. She no longer ate. She no longer needed to. But sometimes she would find herself seated at the table again, bowl in front of her, chopsticks in hand. No food, no ghosts, just the ritual, the rhythm, the knowing. Because once you feed the dead, once they learn your name, once they chew your silence and swallow your breath, they are never truly gone, and neither are you. They still speak of her, quietly, behind shutters, beneath breath. They never use her name, not anymore. Names carry power, and hers no longer belongs to the living. To the children, she's only a story. The widow, the one who fed the dead, the one who sits at the table that never empties. They say if you pass her house at night, you can hear the scrape of chopsticks. 1 pair, then 12. They say the fire never dies in her hearth, though no one sees her gather wood. They say she's not truly alone, not anymore. And they're right. May never left the valley. She never escaped the hunger. She simply became part of the feast. The house is still there, at the far end of the village where the mist grows thicker and even the crows refuse to perch. The windows are always closed, but the curtains move, gently, as if someone inside is watching, breathing, chewing. The villagers leave offerings now, not to her, to the hunger she contains. Boiled eggs, braised roots, jars of salted fish wrapped in cloth, left at her gate, never taken, never touched, but still necessary, because they remember what happened when they forgot. They remember the screams, the silence, the boy. And so they give. And in return, she keeps it quiet. But sometimes, just sometimes, there's another sound. Laughter. Soft. Dry. Not cruel. Knowing. Like someone telling a story only they remember the ending to. And if you listen too closely, you might understand it. You might hear your name in it. You might feel a craving stir beneath your ribs. That's how it begins. Always. With a sound, a scent, a missing bite from your plate, a second bowl where there should only be one. The beginning of hunger. The return of memory. The opening of the mouth. They say the widow still sits at the head of the table, dressed in smoke and silence, chopsticks in hand, eyes open but never blinking. And they say the chair across from her is always empty, waiting for the next cook, the next grief, the next name forgotten by the living and remembered by the dead. The feast never ends, because grief never does. And in the valley, when you cook for the dead, You become what they chew on long after your breath has left you.